Next, what the Sheikh mentions is Jam' Uthman, the Quran, the compilation of the Quran. Before we go into Uthman's compilation of the Quran, we have to understand how the Quran was compiled from the beginning. One, we should understand the compilation of the Quran started before Uthman radiallahu anhu. And it occurred during the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that compilation of the Quran is of two types. You have one, the Jam' fi sudur, the compilation of the hearts that occurred within the chests, and that was via memorization. Now Allah mentioned in the Quran, بَلْ هُوَ آيَاتٌ بَيِّنَاتٌ فِي صُدُورِ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْعِلْمِ. Allah clearly mentioned that the Quran are ayat, clear ayat that are in the hearts, in the chests of those who possess knowledge. Meaning that the people memorized the Quran. And the people at that time were accustomed to memorizing. So it was something easy. That was something the norm for them, right? They weren't busy with TikTok or tactic or whatever it's called, or social media. They didn't fill their minds with so much unnecessary, wasteful information. They were focused on what was important, and as a result, their minds were freed from these distractions, and they were able to memorize. They were able to memorize. It became second nature for them. It was easy. So the Quran was memorized by them. From the things that helped them to memorize was not only that, but Allah Azza wa Jalla, it was a promise from Him to gather the Quran within the heart of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as we saw 2 classes ago, Surah Al-Qiyamah. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took the responsibility of gathering the Quran in the heart of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it was easy. And Allah mentions, وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ, that we made the Quran easy to remember. So is there anyone out there who will take up this challenge in remembering it? Allah made it easy to memorize the Quran. Also, we found that the Quran was revealed in stages. It wasn't revealed all at once. People had time to memorize it and perfect their memorization. This aided the memorization of the Quran within the chest. Also, we find the people, they recited the Quran, their prayers, they had classes of the Quran. The Quran was moist on their tongue. Also, we see that Prophet Muhammad revealed the entire Quran every Ramadan with Angel Jibreel. So all these things assisted the memorization of the Quran. And this is the first type of compilation. The second type of compilation, ikhwani wa akhawat, is the compilation of writing. The compilation through writing down the Quran in the masahif, in papers, in different materials that they had at their disposal at that time. And this the second type went through 3 phases. When it comes to writing down the Quran or compiling the Quran through writing, then there's 3 phases. The first phase is during the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Whenever a verse was revealed to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would actually recite it to the scribes that he had, like Zayd ibn Thabit and others, radiallahu anhu, and they would record it down, write it down. The Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam actually prohibited the Sahaba from writing down anything other than the Quran. So he prohibited them from writing down the Sunnah in the beginning of the affair, in the beginning of revelation, and in the beginning times of the Medina. Towards the end of his life, he allowed it. But in the beginning, he focused only and solely on the Quran, writing down the Quran. As mentioned in the Hadith, in which the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "La taktubu anni, wa man kataba anni ghayra al-Quran, falyamhuhu." Do not write my statements, my hadith. Do not write about me. Whoever writes about me other than the Quran, then let him falyamhuhu, let him erase it. And the reason for this is because of priorities. The first thing that he wanted the Sahaba to focus on was the Quran. And then later on, once the Quran was completed, it was written towards the end of his life, that's when he allowed the Sahaba to write a hadith from him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But the priority was what? To make sure that the Quran was written down. So whenever he had revelation, he would actually recite it to the Sahaba, and the scribes among the Sahaba, like Zayd ibn Thabit and others, they would write it down and preserve it. And subhanAllah, this was done as a form of reference for all the Sahaba if they differed. After the death of Prophet Muhammad, of course, he foreseen this due to revelation. Also, when the Sahaba would eventually die, then there would be clear written down copies from the time of Prophet Muhammad. During this time, of course, they didn't have, full books, right? It was rare to have like books and whatnot. So what they wrote on was what was available to them in terms of parchment, in terms of stone. They could write on stone, they could write on palm leaves, They could write on bones, like shoulder blades of camels, for example. They would write on anything that was writable, okay? And we'll gather it. In this phase, right, during the time of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, all of what was written from the Quran, it contained the Ahruf Sab'a. Ahruf Sab'a that we just spoke about, it was contained within these writings. Also, what was written down were those verses that were eventually abrogated. So even abrogated verses were written down. Everything that was revealed to Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was written down. All right. At this stage, the Quran was not gathered as a whole in one book, but in separate. It was separated between the different scribes, right? Because the Quran was revealed 23 years. So there were different scribes. Ala-Kullid, before the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ died, the ayats were organized. Okay, and it was recited and it was organized. But it was not in one mushaf as we know it today. Why wasn't the entire mushaf gathered as we have it today during the life of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Well, the purpose why it wasn't gathered is because at that time there was no fear of division and difference in the Quran. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was alive, and anyone and everyone could easily return back to him. Also, you had the kibar from the Sahaba, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, and others among the Huffaz, among the Sahaba. They were present, so there was no need to gather it into a mushaf. And remember, at that time, they focused primarily on their memorization. That was the norm. Everyone memorized, and writing was something secondary. They didn't give importance to it as opposed to their memorization. Memorization was number one. Okay, so there was no need. Also, at that time, remember, revelation was still in the process of descending, right, of being revealed. So they didn't write and compile it as we know it today because there was a chance for verses to be abrogated as they experienced, right, at that time towards the end of the Prophet's life. There was verses that were abrogated. Also, the entire Quran wasn't revealed yet. So how can you compile something that hasn't been completely revealed? طيب. And it's mentioned in the seerah of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that the last verse to be revealed didn't occur until one night before his death. And of course, there are the verses found in Surah Al-Baqarah, as we mentioned in class number 1. طيب. So that's a summary. This is a summary of what occurred during this first phase during Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Then came the phase of the Khilafah of Abu Bakr Siddiq, radiallahu anhu, and this happened when they started to pay attention to the compilation of the Quran once a large amount of the Qur'an died in the battle of the Ridda, Hurub al-Ridda, the battles that related to apostasy of those who prevented their zakat, giving zakat to Abu Bakr Siddiq during the time of his Khilafah. So what happened is that a lot of the Huffaz, they died during those battles, and Umar was afraid that if more died, then it might lead to some ayat being missing because of the death of other Huffaz. So he pleaded with Abu Bakr Siddiq to order the writing down, the compilation of the Quran, to compile all of it. Of course, it was written down already. Everything was written down. But now they wanted to compile it, make it all into one. And Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, radiallahu anhu, at first he was hesitant because he knew that this was something that Prophet Muhammad did not do. He didn't compile it during his lifetime. So who am I to compile it after him? And Abu Bakr was his, close friend, Khalil. He was a Khalil. If the Prophet were to take a Khalil, then he would have taken Abu Bakr Siddiq as his Khalil. So he was his close companion with him from the beginning of Revelation, even before that. So he knew the Prophet the best out of all the human beings, now among the men. So out of fear that he would perform an innovation, he didn't want to do it. But Umar kept advising him until Allah opened his chest, and he eventually decided to compile what was already written, compile everything that was written. And of course, this occurred in the Battle of Yamama, or after the Battle of Yamama, which was the 12th year after Hijrah. What Abu Bakr as-Siddiq did, radiallahu anhu, was gather the scribes and memorizers to take on this task. So he gathered all the scribes of the Prophet who were alive, and all the memorizers, the most prominent among them, to focus on compiling the Quran, what was written during the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And among them was Zayd ibn Thabit. And Abu Bakr Siddiq, radiallahu anhu, he was actually from the memorizer of the Quran. He memorized the entire Quran, despite what some people claim that he didn't. But he did. And the reason why he didn't do it himself is because, remember, he's the Khalifa. And the person who's a Khalifa is in charge of all the affairs of the Muslims. So he's too busy to take on this task. This is why he gathered Zayd ibn Thabit and others among the scribes and memorizers of the Quran to do it on his behalf. Zayd ibn Thabit was one of those who was selected to be at the head of this, because not only was he from the scribe of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not only was a hafiz from the Hufaz, among the Kibar al-Hufaz, but he's also among those who attended those Ramadan gatherings where Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Jibreel will review the Quran with one another. And he was also present during the Arud al-Akhirah, the last sitting where they reviewed the Quran 2 times before the death of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the last gathering in Ramadan, the last meeting. And also because Zayd ibn Thabit was a person of knowledge, he was trustworthy, etc. So this is why he was selected. What was his method in compiling this Quran, compiling what was written? As mentioned, that there were 4 major principles as it relates to what Zayd did. First, what Zayd did is that he only took that what was written in front of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Remember, he was with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam during those gatherings, so he knows what was written and who wrote it. So he gathered only that which was written in front of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he commanded them to write. What he also did, ikhwani wa akhawat, he only accepted that which was memorized in the chest as well. So what was written and what was memorized. Also, he did not accept anything that was written unless there were 2 people, 2 witnesses who testified, of course, from the Sahaba, the most trustworthy people. He had 2 witnesses who testified that what was written during the life of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in front of him. And the last thing, he did not accept what people memorized unless they obtained it directly from the mouth of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Meaning, if a person recited something in the Quran, if they didn't learn it directly from Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he didn't accept it and put it in this compilation. So he was very stringent. The reason why he did this is because Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not teach every single person, every Sahabi the Quran. Rather, he selected the Sahaba and perfected the recitation, like Ubay ibn Ka'b and others, and then he sent them, to teach the people, teach the Tabi'een and others among the Sahaba the Quran. So he did not accept those who memorized the Quran unless they learned it directly from Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So these are the 4 major things of what Zayd ibn Thabit did when he did this compilation under the Khilafah of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. All right. What are some of the special or distinguishing features of this compilation during Abu Bakr Siddiq's time? There are a few. One is that Abu Bakr Siddiq, in this compilation, he was very precise in terms of who he selected to take over this project. So he selected Zayd ibn Thabit, right, the biggest scribe of the Prophet Muhammad to take on this project. Also, in this compilation, anything in which the recital was abrogated, it was omitted. Anything, any verse, that was abrogated in its recital, then it was omitted from this compilation. Also, the only thing that was accepted was the recitals during the Al-Arudatu Al-Akhirah, the last sitting of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam with Jibreel in Ramadan, and anything after that. That was accepted. And it included the Ahruf al-Sab'a. This is an important point. It included the Ahruf al-Sab'a. Also in this compilation, all the surah and the ayat were organized. So The ayat were organized as well as the surah. They were organized at this point. At this point, there was only one copy of this manuscript, of this book. And this copy was referenced as al-Mushaf. This is the first time it was referred to as al-Mushaf during the Jam', the compilation of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, radiallahu anhu. And it was with Abu Bakr as-Siddiq because he was the Khalifa. Also related to this compilation, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq did not impose upon the people to recite from this Mushaf. Okay, so you had other qira'at that the other Sahaba were reciting, and it was permissible for them to do so, whether it's from this Mus'haf or any other thing that was related to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They recited with it, okay, what they learned directly from Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So these are a few distinguishing features regarding the compilation that occurred during the time of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. طيب. After Abu Bakr as-Siddiq passed away, he died, radiallahu anhu, this Mus'haf was given to Umar, the next Khalifa, and it remained with him until he was martyred. After he was martyred, it moved to the possession of his sister and the wife of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Hafsa. So now this Mus'haf was in the possession of Hafsa. And then when Umar passed away, right, it was given to Hafsa. Then Uthman came into the Khilafah. He became the third Caliph. Naam. And he requested this Mus'haf from her, as we see in the Hadith that we're studying right now. Okay, he requested it from her. After he received it from her and finished his compilation, he returned it back to Hafsa. And just for benefit, after this period, we'll go more into detail regarding what happened in Uthman's time. But what happened afterwards is that when she died, okay, Marwan ibn Hakam sent this copy to her brother, Abdullah bin Umar, radiallahu anhu. And then Abdullah bin Umar, he took this copy and destroyed it. He destroyed it out of fear that it will be different from what Uthman ibn Affan compiled. طيب. So what happened when Uthman took the copy, this Mus'haf from Hafsa? What did Uthman do? Of course, Hadith number 9, it clarifies what happened. We should know that this occurred late in the year 24 years after Hijrah and the beginning of 25 years after Hijrah. And at this time, as we see in the Hadith, Uthman selected 4 scribes to compile the Quran. Zayd ibn Thabit al-Ansari, Abdullah bin Zubair, Sa'id ibn As, Abdurrahman ibn Harith ibn Hisham. Okay, these latter 3 were from Quraysh. And Uthman ibn Affan, radiallahu anhu, he commanded them that if they were to, let's mention the Hadith here, narration, إذا اختلفتم أنتم وزيد بن ثابت في شيء من القرآن فاكتبوه بلسان قريش. Okay, if you all differed as it relates to the dialects of the Quran, of the Arabiya of the Quran, then write it in the dialect of Quraysh. فإن القرآن أنزل بلسانهم ففعلوا. Because the Quran was revealed in their tongue. So they did so. So they did so. Okay? So basically what they did is that, remember we talked about a word being pronounced different ways. Malik, for example, can be pronounced Malik. What they did is if they differed in the pronunciation of the word, then they would write it the way Quraysh wrote it. The way Quraysh wrote it. Okay? However, with that being said, they would write it in a way where it would accept the other qira'at. So even if you take a look at Surah Al-Fatiha, and the way Malik Yawmiddin is written, you notice that there's no alif after the mim. This is the dialect of Quraysh, okay? It's written without the elongation of the mim. However, it's written that way so that way also accepts the elongation. Khairan? So this is how they wrote and went on to write the Mus'haf. And of course, in that time, there were no dots and no symbols. These dots and symbols were introduced later on with Abu al-Asad ad-Du'ali, when the need became apparent that they had to write down these dots and symbols so that people could actually read it. The non-Arabs, those who were not fluent in the Arabic language, needed assistance. How do you know this is a fa, not a qaf? So they decided to write it out at that time. That's later on. But during the time of the Sahaba, there were no dots and no symbols, no fatha, dhamma, kasra, la. Khairan. This is how they went on to compile the Quran. After they finished this job, Uthman ibn Affan, he returned that copy that he borrowed from Hafsa back to Hafsa, as I mentioned earlier. And then he commanded that this copy, this final copy, to be the official final copy of the Quran. And everything else should be burned. What are some of the distinguishing qualities of what occurred with this compilation? One, Quran was written ala harfin wahid. Okay, it was written in the dialect of Quraysh, as we mentioned earlier. It was written in the way that Quraysh pronounced the Arabic language. All right? But it was written in a way that accepted other dialects. So this is why you see this is what's called al-Rasm al-Uthmani. Rasm al-Uthmani. The words are written in a way which Quraysh pronounced, but it accepted other qira'ats, other ahruf. This is the first thing. Second thing, it removed any of the verses that were abrogated in its tilawah, in its recital. The third thing, what happened is that they restricted themselves, Zayd ibn Thabit and others, to compile that which was recited during the last final session of al-Ardatul Akhirah with Prophet Muhammad and Jibreel in Ramadan, last Ramadan. And anything besides this and before that was omitted, was left out. Okay? So everything from that last sitting up until the death of Prophet Muhammad was included in this compilation. The Mus'haf was compiled in terms of the organization of the ayat and the surah as we see it today. As we see it today, this was the final organization of the Quran. All right? After Uthman did this, what was the response? The Sahaba as a whole, all of them, radiallahu anhum, all agreed. There was consensus among the Sahaba. They accepted this action from Uthman ibn Affan. In fact, Zayd ibn Thabit is mentioned in the Sharh Sunnah Imam Baghawi, volume number 4, 520, look at page 524. Zayd ibn Thabit, he said, فَرَأَيْتُ أَصْحَابَ مُحَمَّدٍ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ يَقُولُونَ, I saw that the companions of Prophet Muhammad saying, أَحْسَنَ وَاللَّهِ عُثْمَانُ. أَحْسَنَ وَاللَّهِ عُثْمَانُ. They repeated, they said, Wallahi, they swore by Allah that Uthman did well. And this was the consensus among the Sahaba. Ikhwani wa akhawat. No one rejected what Uthman did, because there was much differing at that time. And what Uthman did was a means of unity to make, and everything was correct. It was authentically attributed back to Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and there was consensus among the Sahaba. طيب. So then what happened after he compiled this? We mentioned that the copy that he borrowed from Hafsa was returned back to Hafsa. Hafsa died. It went into possession of Abdullah bin Umar, and then that copy was burned out of fear that it would contain something that conflicted with what Uthman did. This also shows that Abdullah bin Umar, he agreed with what Uthman did. Even Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, he eventually, at first he was opposed to it because he was one of the Hufaz al-Quran, but he was not requested to compile the Quran. But eventually, Ikhwani wa akhwat, Abdullah bin Mas'ud, he agreed as well. Abdullah bin Mas'ud agreed with this action as well. So at first there was some opposition from his perspective, but eventually he agreed as well. So all of the Sahaba at the end agreed with what Uthman did. After that, he ordered for all versions to be burnt that did not agree with what was compiled in this Mus'haf, this final Mus'haf. That's what the people did. They burnt everything else. And then he also commanded that there be copies of this version. Okay, some scholars, they differ as to how many copies there were. Some say there was 4, some they say there was 5, some they say it was 6, some say there was 7. Okay, and these 7 copies, let's say there were 7, were distributed to different cities. So one remained in Medina, one went to Mecca, one went to Sham, one went to Yemen, one went to Bahrain, one went to Basra, one went to Kufa. 7 different cities. All right. طيب. And then people recited from that point to this point has been the same. Wallahi alhamd. Everything from that point in those books is the same as what we recite today. Wallahi alhamd. What are some of the differences between Uthman's compilation, Abu Bakr's compilation? This will help us to distinguish between both compilations. One difference between the two is that the reason for compilation. Abu Bakr Siddiq, he compiled the Quran out of fear of death of the Hufaz, right? The Hufaz were dying, the Sahaba were dying. So out of fear, he wanted to compile everything into one. Of course, at the request of Umar bin Khattab, radiallahu anhu. As for Uthman, the reason for his compilation was because of the differing that occurred. As we see in the 9th hadith in the compilation, there was differing, right, among the people, reciting different ways. They had the foresight to stop this differing and make everyone united upon one recital. Khairan. Another difference is that Abu Bakr Siddiq, his mushaf contained all the ahruf recited in the final version. So not just that of Quraysh, but the other 7, the other 6 were included in his version. As for Uthman, then the official harf was that of Quraysh. The official dialect is that of Quraysh and any other ahruf that agrees with Quraysh. Okay, Abu Bakr, another difference is that Abu Bakr did not impose upon everyone else to follow this compilation, while Uthman, he imposed upon everyone to follow his compilation due to the necessity. And his action, subhanAllah, is an extension of the sunnah, right? Because the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that you will see after me ikhtilafan kathira, much differing. So upon you, alaykum bi sunnati wa sunnati al-khulafa'i ar-rashidin al-mahdiyin. So upon you is my sunnah and the sunnah of the 4 rightly guided caliphs. Yani Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali. Addu alayha bin nawajid. Bite onto it with your molar teeth. Okay? So the scholars are derived from it. He said, Addu alayha. Yani bite onto it. Meaning that the sunnah, the actions of the Khulafa al-Rashidun are an extension of the sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him of foresight to show us that what Uthman did was correct. What Uthman did was correct because not only did he foresee it by the statement Addu alayha bin nawajid, but also we see the consensus of the Sahaba in which they accepted what Uthman did. They accepted what Uthman did. And there was not even one opposition at the end of the affair. Now, hope this is clear, ikhwani, akhwat.